So Warren, I'm gonna ask you some very pointed questions. I mean, just straight out. The first thing I want to ask you is, did you kill Nolan?
Did you kill Nolan? Straight out. No cushion, no warm-up. That is the question millions of people have been screaming into their phones for a month. And on a Thursday afternoon in front of a camera, somebody finally asked it out loud to one of the young men who was on that island. And then the video cut away. Now, a man who spent years of his life inside Army interrogation rooms sat down and watched that entire interview. Not just that one question, all of it, every sentence, every stumble, every single time the footage jumps. And what he says is strange. He says the most revealing thing in the whole interview has nothing to do with the moment Warren Hudson was asked about Nolan's death. It happens before that. Way before that. It happens in the first 90 seconds, when Warren is asked the easiest question anybody could ask him. Who was Nolan to you? That is the question this man says Warren could not answer. And once you hear why, you will not be able to unhear it for the rest of the interview. There is a word Warren says over and over. He says it so many times that once it gets pointed out to you, you will start counting it yourself. And this interrogator's position is that this one word quietly dismantles the entire premise of the interview. There is also a moment where Warren gives a time. A simple time. What time did you get to the island? And he gives an answer, then immediately corrects himself to a completely different answer. Here is the part nobody on that recording knew. The state of Mississippi already has that time written down in a document, and it does not match either version. We are going to walk through all of it. But there is something you need to understand about the man doing this analysis first, because it changes how you hear everything he says.
For those of you who do not know, I was an interrogator, human intelligence collector, source operator in the Army. It's important for me to give you those credentials up front because I want you to know from where I'm coming, where I break this interview down. I am an expert in what I'm about to do. I was trained by the Army to identify deception. I have multiple certifications in scientific content analysis.
He was an interrogator in the United States Army, not a hobbyist, not a body language guy with a ring light. He was a human intelligence collector and a source operator. He is certified in scientific content analysis, which is the discipline of breaking down the exact words a person chooses, tracking when those words change, and counting how much space a person spends on each part of their own story. He is trained in the read technique. He has been through strategic debriefing courses. He has conducted, by his own account, thousands of interrogations. His job was to sit across from people and find the seams. But here is the thing he stops and says before he plays a single clip, and it is the most important sentence in his entire breakdown. Deception is not the same thing as lying. He is insistent on this. He says people are deceptive for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with guilt. You go deceptive because you are embarrassed, because you are protecting somebody else, because you did something stupid that had no consequences and you do not want it repeated, because you are terrified of being blamed for something you did not do. That last one matters here, because a young man who has been accused of murder by strangers on the internet has every reason in the world to tighten up in front of a camera. So the interrogator is careful. He says over and over that he is not accusing Warren Hudson of causing Nolan Wells' death. He says he does not have the evidence to say that, and neither does anybody else watching. What he says is that he can identify where a person is being deceptive, and then in his old job, he would take that spot and pull on it until the reason came out. He cannot do that here. He cannot sit Warren down and ask the follow-up questions. So all he can do is show you where the seams are. And one more thing, he has no inside access, no leaked file, no source in the sheriff's department. He is working from exactly the same public footage you can watch yourself. He just knows what to look for.
Nolan and my buddy Javon are talking, and
Nolan and my buddy Javon are talking. Once again, not Nolan and him.
you know, I grew up with Nolan, and
We're going back to growing up with Nolan. We just went backwards for no reason.
Nolan's, just all, like I said, like just so joyful, like always happy. Like every picture I have with Nolan.
Why are we talking about Nolan's pictures? And what did he say to you? That was the question asked.
Picture I have of Nolan, he's smiling. I mean, like he's always happy. If I always need like a shed of light, I'm calling Nolan, and Nolan and I laugh and joke a lot. Like that's how our friend group is.
That's how our friend group is. Not me and Nolan, just our friend group.
Jokingly laugh. No one takes anything that serious. We enjoy our time together. I mean, there's never any awkwardness within our friend group. We're very, very tight. So if I ever need to get something off my chest or talk to anybody, I'm talking to all my friends. I'm not just talking to like specifically anybody. I would go out
Notice how he's making it very group general, because he knows that his relationship with Nolan is not as he has represented it. But listen to when he finally tells you what Nolan said that was so indicative of their friendship.
And if I'm having issues with something, I go talk to my group chat, and my guys are there to, give me a hand anytime I need it. And all my guys are, all my buddies are the same exact way. Nolan was the same exact way. If you ever need something, I'm here, man. Like that's how he was. So
never answered the question. He's basically saying, if you ever need something, I'm here. That's how he was. He didn't say he said that to me that day.
Before he plays a word of the interview, he makes an observation about the room it happened in. Of every outlet on the planet, every newspaper, every network, every podcast, this is where the silence broke. His read is that the venue was chosen for a reason. He describes the channel as heavily slanted, narrative-driven, and unlikely to push back hard. He says a curated interview on friendly ground is not the same thing as answering questions. And here is where the facts get genuinely interesting, because the arrangement of this interview is now public record. Warren Hudson's stepmother is Ashley Cole. She is a sitting Mississippi Chancery Court judge. Brandon Tatum, the host, has confirmed publicly that Judge Cole was the one who reached out to him. She contacted him, not the other way around. Tatum has also gone on the record to defend it. He says he had never spoken to Ashley Cole or anyone in the Hudson family before she got in touch. He says there was no rehearsal before they taped. He argues that a parent trying to protect a child is naturally going to choose somebody they trust to present the story fairly, and he compares it directly to Nolan's mother going to Ben Crump. And on the conflict question, Tatum's argument is that Judge Cole sits over family court matters. She has no authority over a criminal investigation. He makes one more point, and it is a fair one. He says if this family really had the kind of influence people are accusing them of having, Warren would not be publicly accused of killing his best friend, and he would not need a podcast to defend himself. So hold both of those things at once. The interrogator's theory is that Warren was coached, and he names the judge as where that coaching came from. That is a theory. He says so himself. The verified part is narrower and stranger. A sitting judge contacted a media personality to arrange the first public interview for a young man connected to an open death investigation. That happened. Everything else is interpretation. One more piece of context that has not gotten enough attention. Warren's father, Dr. Benjamin Hudson, has publicly offered a $50,000 reward for information about Nolan's death. Now let's get into the interview itself.
People are deceptive for many different reasons. Like if I ask you a question, you may be deceptive in your answer because you don't want to hurt my feelings. You may be deceptive in your answer because you're embarrassed about something you did. You may be deceptive in your answer because you're worried that somebody might take it the wrong way and you'll get in trouble for something you didn't do. There's lots of reasons people are deceptive, which is why in my previous job, once I identified the deception, I would then use that as a point of interrogation to get to the bottom of why you were being deceptive, and that's how we uncover the truth.
The very first real question is soft. It is a gift of a question. What was your relationship like with Nolan? Who was he to you? And Warren's answer starts like this. He says, could describe Nolan in a million ways. Then he says he is not going to. The interrogator freezes right there. Because this is the whole foundation of his discipline. Listen to what people actually say. Not what you assume they meant. not the friendly version your brain fills in. The words. He said he was not going to describe him, and then he doesn't.
And I want to start at the very beginning of all of this and ask you, what was your relationship like with Nolan? Who was he to you?
Nolan, I could describe Nolan in a million ways. I mean, Nolan was not just a best friend of me, but he was a brother. I grew up through elementary, middle school, high school, and even our freshman year of college. You know, we talked on the phone all the time. We were really close friends. And I mean, Nolan was like a brother to me. And
What comes out instead is this. Nolan was not just a best friend, he was a brother. Nolan lit up every room he walked into. He always had a smile on his face. He always had something good to say. He never argued with anyone. Sweetest soul ever. Every word of that may be completely true. Nolan's high school coach said something very similar. He said Nolan carried himself with humility, treated people with respect, worked hard, and led by example. That is the point. The interrogator's argument is that Warren just described Nolan the way a coach would, the way a neighbor would, the way somebody who knew of him would. Think about your own best friend, the person you would call at 2 in the morning. Now describe them. You would not lead with their personality traits. You would lead with a story. The time you two got lost. The stupid thing they say every time. The argument you had over nothing that you still bring up. Best friends come with evidence. And through that whole opening answer, there is one. Exactly one. Warren says he and Nolan would go to Waffle House once a week. The interrogator actually stops and praises it. He says that is what a real personal detail sounds like. That is the texture of an actual friendship. His question is why there is only one. Because a person who has a million ways to describe someone, and who was asked directly, and who had weeks to prepare for this interview, gave the world one Waffle House. And then he went straight back to generic. This is the part that reorganizes the entire interview once you hear it. The interrogator's central finding is that Warren Hudson appears structurally unable to talk about Nolan one-on-one. Every single time he reaches for Nolan, he pulls somebody else in with him. Watch it happen. He is asked why Nolan's mother did not seem to know these young men. He says Nolan was usually at his house or at his buddy's house. Then, immediately, my friend group is very, very tight-knit. Not me and Nolan, my friend group. He talks about hanging out. We hung out most weekdays. We hung out every day on the weekend. He is asked how close he was to Nolan, and he answers by describing a group calendar. He describes 8th grade, the COVID year, when he says he and Nolan got really close. And he says they were in class all year together, him and a couple of his buddies. He talks about the boat trips. Nolan was always trying to come out with us. Nolan was always welcome to come. Nolan was out there with us, not with me. He is asked to describe their bond, and he says Nolan was just as close with his friends as anyone else. Read that again. He was asked to explain what made Nolan special to him personally, and his answer was that Nolan was equally close with everybody. Later, he is asked directly where Nolan was on the island. He starts by saying he had a couple of conversations with Nolan, and then names them, Nolan and Javon, Nolan and my buddy James. Never just Nolan, and when he is asked to share something Nolan said to him, he tells us about a conversation between Nolan and his buddy Javon. The interrogator's word for this is associative. Same circles, constant overlap, real familiarity, genuine affection even, but not the brother-level bond that is being sold to the audience. Now here is why that matters so much more than a semantics argument. Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, said publicly that she did not really know these young men. That statement got picked apart online. People treated it as odd, some treated it as suspicious. The interrogator says it is the most consistent piece of evidence in the entire interview. Because parents know their kid's best friend. If you have children, you know exactly who is coming through your door. You know which one eats everything in your fridge. She did not know Warren. Warren cannot say Nolan's name without saying the word group. Those two facts agree with each other completely, and they both disagree with the interview's headline. Now the questions get harder and the answers get stranger. Tatum asks him to walk through the day. Start at the beginning. What happened on the 4th of July? Follow this in order. Just follow it. He says he stayed with Nolan at his buddy's house the night before. Then he says he woke up at his buddy's house and they went to McDonald's. And he specifies Nolan was not with him. He points that out unprompted. He says they got food. Then he says he went and got breakfast. Then he says the boat was already hooked up to his truck. Then he says, well, first I ran to my house, then I went to McDonald's and came back. Stop. 2 versions of the same morning, 30 seconds apart. He went to McDonald's, then he went home first, and then to McDonald's. He got food, and then separately he got breakfast. The boat was already hooked up, and then he went home to get something. Then the footage cuts. The interrogator says that in an investigation, this is where you slow everything down. Because this is not a hazy memory of a random Tuesday. This is the morning of. This is the sequence of events on the last day anybody saw Nolan Wells alive. And there is something else buried in this stretch that he says he would have jumped on immediately. Warren keeps volunteering the weather. Nobody asked. Tatum asks what they were doing on the boat, whether there was music, whether it was a party. And Warren's answer swerves. He says the water was calm. He says it was blowing 3 or 4 knots. He says it was a great day to be out there, not cloudy at all. Then later, on the way back, he says it was calm again, a little rougher, but nothing his buddy's boats could not handle. The interrogator's point is not that any of this is false. It is probably all true. His point is that nobody asked, and Warren keeps returning to it anyway. In his old job, that repetition is not noise. That is a target. You write it down, and you come back to it, and you ask the person directly, why does that keep coming up? Why does it matter to you that I know the water was fine? He does not answer that for you. He just leaves it sitting there.
Sweetest soul ever. And I mean, I had a great relationship with Nolan. I've never got in an argument with Nolan. We were super close, and I've never said or will ever have anything bad to say about Nolan Wells.
I want you to notice that in that entire description, he described Nolan generically. Someone who's not Nolan's best friend or like a brother could have described Nolan. Hey, every time I saw Nolan, he had a smile on his face. I've never seen the guy be mean to anybody. He lights up every room he walks into. These are things you describe people that you just know about in your life. That's not how you describe people that you are very close to. When you describe people that you're as close to as this guy claims to be, you describe personal relationship. You describe a personal connection. You describe things that only you as a friend would know, right? Think about how you would describe your friend. You would give personal examples. This one time we did this. You would do something that was more personable than this generic description of Nolan. And I'm going to show you in the rest of his language why I believe that his relationship with Nolan was more of just a general friend relationship. Like they all kind of hang out in the same circles. So he interacted with Nolan a lot by virtue of that association, but it's an associative relationship, not a best friend like brother relationship. I don't believe that.
This is the moment the interrogator calls immediate deception, and it is the one place where I can tell you something he could not. Tatum asks what time they pulled up to the island. Warren says they pulled up at 10:30. Then he says, early afternoon. The interrogator's objection is simple and correct. Nobody on earth calls 10:30 in the morning early afternoon. Those are 2 different halves of the day. He flags it instantly as a red flag, and he moves on. But there is a document. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources has records from that day. Those records show the boat left the southern shore of Mississippi at 9:56 in the morning, and they show it reached the western tip of Horn Island at 11:14. 11:14. So Warren said 10:30, then he said early afternoon, and the state's own paperwork says neither. Now, I want to be extremely careful here, because this is exactly the kind of detail that gets twisted online. An 18-year-old misremembering a clock time from a chaotic holiday, weeks after the worst day of his life, is not evidence of a crime. People are bad at times. All of us are bad at times. But this is not a random detail. This is the front end of the timeline in an open death investigation. It is the kind of discrepancy that gets flagged, cross-referenced, and put in front of a grand jury, and it does not sit alone. An independent analytical review was completed at the beginning of August, 22 pages. It went through photographs, videos, GPS coordinates, and witness accounts. Its conclusion was that the available evidence still leaves what it called a material gap in the timeline, a hole between the last independently corroborated sighting of Nolan Wells and the reported departure of the boat that brought him there. That report is careful too. It reaches no conclusion about criminal or civil responsibility. It is not accusing anyone of anything. It is a list of what investigators still need. But that is the state of it. A month on, the timeline still has a hole in it, and here is the part that lands hardest. Nolan's friends came back to the mainland around 3 in the afternoon. They told investigators he had stayed behind, that he said he would find another ride, that he wanted to keep talking with a girl. Nolan's phone came back on that boat. Nolan did not. The interrogator counts multiple hard edits in the released footage, and his argument is not that the interview was edited. Every interview is edited. His argument is about where. The first one lands as Warren is saying that Nolan was on the boat with him last year. The second lands as he is asked directly which boat Nolan rode on that day. The third lands in the middle of the McDonald's timeline, right as he is contradicting himself. The fourth lands as Tatum starts asking what Nolan personally said to him on the island. 4 cuts, every one of them on a Nolan-specific answer. Not one of them on a stretch about the weather, or the crowd size, or the length of the island. The interrogator's read is that those are not random trims for pacing. Something was taken out at each of those points. And on the second one, he points out something small that stuck with me. Right before that edit, Warren appears to name a friend, and then the cut happens, and when the footage resumes, he has switched to saying my buddy. He also flags Warren's face. Just before Tatum asks where Nolan was, Warren looks off to the side, at somebody or something out of frame, and swallows. Now, the counter to all of this is on the record and it deserves to be said plainly. Brandon Tatum has publicly denied that there was any rehearsal, any coaching, or any prior arrangement with the family beyond Judge Cole's initial contact. An edit is not proof of a cover-up. Producers cut for time, for stumbles, for legal caution, for 100 boring reasons. But 4 cuts, and all 4 of them landing on the same subject, is a pattern. And patterns are what this man was trained to notice. Then there is a moment where the interrogator turns his attention away from Warren entirely and onto the person asking the questions. Tatum tells Warren that the statements circulating out there made it seem like it was just him, Nolan, and maybe 2 or 3 other guys on that island, and he calls that completely incorrect. The interrogator's reaction is blunt. Nobody ever said that, and he is right. From the first week, everybody involved acknowledged that Horn Island was packed. The sheriff's department publicly asked anyone who had been on the Northwest tip that day to come forward with photos or video. You do not put out a mass appeal for witnesses on a deserted island. Warren's own answer confirms it. He describes rows of boats stretching as far as he could see. He estimates thousands of people. He describes 3 separate boats in their own group, carrying somewhere between 20 and 30 people. So the interrogator's charge is that the interviewer built a claim nobody made, handed it to Warren to knock down, and used it to make the audience distrust everything else they had heard. And sitting right next to that is a contradiction that never gets challenged. Warren says this trip was planned. He says he and his buddies had been talking about it for weeks in advance. And then he says he called his friend Bart that morning and asked him to bring his boat out. Weeks of planning. And an entire additional boat added the same day. He even explains why Bart was free. Bart's dad had decided not to go. Nobody in that room asks the obvious question. If 20 to 30 people were coming, and this had been in the works for weeks, how was the third boat a morning of phone call? That question does not get asked because nothing in that interview gets asked twice. Here is the detail that makes the timeline problem sting. The same young man who could not tell you whether he went to McDonald's before or after he went home, who gave 2 versions of a breakfast run, becomes suddenly, surgically precise the moment the subject changes. Listen to how he describes the boats. The tide line was on the inside. The Palm Beach was in the middle. The Triton was on the outer side. Bow anchors set, rear anchors set, all 3 tied off. He tells you the boats by manufacturer and by length. A 22-foot Triton, an 18-foot Palm Beach, a 24-foot tide line. He tells you how many people were on each one. 4 guys on the Palm Beach, 8 or 9 on the Triton, 10 to 15 or 16 on the tide line. Then he tells you the water depth. If you jumped off the bow, you were about neck deep. If you got off the stern, you were waist deep. Neck deep off the bow, waist deep off the stern. That is a photograph. That is a person with a functioning, detailed, confident memory of that day. The interrogator's point is devastating in how simple it is. The memory works. It works perfectly. It works for boat brands, boat lengths, head counts, anchor placement, and the depth of the water under each end of each vessel. It only stops working on the timeline. And there is one more thing in this stretch that he flags as coached. Warren volunteers, unprompted, that Horn Island is roughly 10 to 12 miles long. Then he adds that he is just throwing that off the top of his head. Nobody just knows the length of a barrier island off the top of their head. Again, that could be nothing. A kid who grew up fishing those waters might genuinely know it. But the interrogator's ear picks up something specific in how it arrives. It does not sound remembered, it sounds recited. The last exchange in the first part of that interview is, in this man's assessment, the worst one. Tatum sets it up carefully. He tells Warren that Nolan said something to him that day. Something about what that day meant to him. Something that Tatum frames as being indicative of their friendship. And he asks Warren to share it. The setup does all the work. You are now expecting a scene. You are picturing Nolan on that beach, walking up to his best friend, putting a hand on his shoulder and saying something that will break your heart. That is not what comes out. Warren starts by saying Nolan and his buddy Javon were talking. Then he detours into growing up with Nolan. Then into how every picture he has of Nolan, Nolan is smiling. Then into how their friend group jokes around and nobody takes anything too seriously. Then into how, if he ever needs to get something off his chest, he goes to his group chat. And then he lands on a character description. He says Nolan was the kind of person who would tell you, if you ever need something, I'm here. That is how he was. Not, he said that to me. Not, he said it to me that day, on that beach. The interrogator's read is that the question implied a specific moment between 2 people, and the answer described a general personality trait that 100 people could have described. The most emotionally loaded question in the entire first part, and it comes back empty. So let's go back to where we started. Did you kill Nolan? He said no. Flat, no hedging, no qualification. Warren Hudson denied it directly and denied it completely. He also denied the phone allegations. When Nolan's mother said she found no photos and no videos from that day on either of her son's 2 Snapchat accounts and said she believed something had been deleted, Warren's response was that nobody had Nolan's password, that nobody was in contact with that phone until it was moved from the boat to a truck, and that there was no reason for anyone to touch it because there was nothing to hide. He explained why he was not at the funeral. He said he had received thousands of death threats, that his family had too, that he was afraid for his safety, and that he did not want to pull attention away from Nolan's family on the day they buried their son. And he said the group repeatedly asked Nolan to leave the island with them, and Nolan would not go. He has also said something else that a lot of people found difficult to hear. He said that in the first hours, he thought the search was an overreaction. He said that when a group of about 10 people came pounding on the door of the house where they were staying after midnight, he assumed Nolan had just crashed on somebody's couch. Those are his answers. He is entitled to have them heard. And now, here is the part that makes this whole breakdown harder to wave away. He is not the only expert who watched that interview. A body language analyst named Susan Constantine reviewed the same footage independently. She was clear about her limits. She said she believes Warren was mostly telling the truth. She said explicitly that she is not saying foul play was involved in Nolan's death. But on one clip, the moment Warren insists that nobody touched Nolan's phone, her assessment was that he was being deceptive. Two analysts, two completely different disciplines, no contact with each other. One trained by the Army to break down sentence structure, one trained to read a face. Both of them stopped at the phone. That does not make either of them right. Neither of them has subpoena power. Neither of them was on that island. But it is a strange coincidence. And then, at the end of his breakdown, this man does something that tells you he knows exactly what he is holding. He stops. He says the interview he just took apart is only part one. There is a second part where Warren describes what actually happened on Horn Island. And he says he found something in it. He says there are a couple of spots in that second interview that are red flags of the highest degree. His words are that when he shows it to you, you are going to say, "Oh my God, that's bad," and then he does not show it. He says he is already 45 minutes deep, and he will do it in a separate video. I am not going to guess what it is. Guessing is what turned this case into a swamp of fake documents and false claims in the first place. State officials have had to publicly warn people about forged paperwork circulating online, and a man in California was arrested for making death threats against Judge Ashley Cole. That is where this has gone. But here is where the case genuinely stands right now. The state autopsy is complete. It has not been released. District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath has said it will be withheld until a grand jury reviews it, and she has said that every death in that county except natural causes and non-criminal car wrecks goes to a grand jury as standard practice in her office. The independent autopsy, performed in Washington by Dr. Roger Mitchell, the president of the National Medical Association, and paid for by Colin Kaepernick, came back undetermined pending investigation. He found red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head. He found no fractures and no deep tissue injuries. He noted heavy decomposition, which can hide bruising. And he noted this. Part of Nolan's throat had been retained during the first autopsy in Mississippi and was not there when the body reached him, which means he could not rule out injury to the neck. He left 7 outstanding questions. Among them, how Nolan entered the water and whether there was water in his airway. He also wrote something that has stayed with a lot of people. When a body is found in the water and drowning is suspected, it is critical to establish how that person entered the water, and that this is especially important for someone who could swim. Nolan Wells could swim. That is the question underneath every single one of these interviews. Not what the friends did, not what a judge arranged, not what got edited out of a podcast. How did an 18-year-old who could swim end up in that water? The FBI is assisting. The family has subpoenaed Snapchat, TikTok, Meta, WhatsApp, and Life 360. The grand jury is next.
Never answered the question. He's basically saying, if you ever need something, I'm here. That's how he was. He didn't say he said that to me that day. Officer Tatum is trying to phrase the question to imply that on Horn Island that day, Nolan walked up with him, patted him on the shoulder, and said, "Brother, you ever need something, I'm here for you." That's how they're trying to present it. They're trying to present it in a very deceptive way that Nolan came up and said, "If you ever need something, I'm here for you." And in this convoluted, roundabout, fucking all over the place answer that he gave, he said, Nolan was the kind of guy, if you ever need something, I'm here for you. That's how he was. Not Nolan said that to me. Not Nolan told me that directly that day. This is this is disgustingly deceptive.
And then you guys get ready to leave prematurely.
Right.
And explain that, because you guys got there around 10.
And that's where he ends the interview right here. The next part, the part 2, he goes to Horn Island. And oh my God, I found a couple spots in that interview on Horn Island. It is red flag to the fucking highest degree. I'm going to show you one. And when I show it to you, you're going to be like, oh my God, that's bad.
Everything in this breakdown is one trained interrogator's professional read of a public interview. Deception, in his own words, is not the same thing as a lie. People hold back for all kinds of reasons, and he says plainly that he is not accusing Warren Hudson of causing Nolan's death. Warren has denied any involvement. No one has been charged with anything. The state's autopsy is complete and headed to a grand jury, and that is where the real answers are going to come from. If you want to be here when Part 2 drops, and when that grand jury finally moves, please subscribe to this channel. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He was a wide receiver. He was supposed to be back at practice that Monday. His family is still waiting.